All right, Class A, we're in week 4 here, and we're getting into some of the Native American songs and poetry, or chants, as they're called in the oral tradition. If you'll notice, there's a lot of repetition, kind of builds in an incantatory effect. As you can see, there are kind of, nature, of course, plays a prominent part. But what I want you to understand about these chants, and I have a lot of resources for you. For instance, like this one explains the Navajo chants better than I can, and also this introduction here by James Mooney talking about the Ghost Dance and uh, the Messiah letters. Explain things far better than I could with any lecture, so I'm just going to hit some highlights for you. Basically, you got to keep in mind that these dances are a ritual that is all supposed to lead to healing, to cleansing, to unity, especially with the Navajos. And, well, I mean, with everybody really, but it's all about purification. And there's even a belief that the body could be healed through this, and that communication, or that individuals could commune, or the collective could commune with supernatural entities, which are far different than what we imagine. Um, and their relationship with these entities are far different than we can imagine. There is kind of the idea that everything in the world is connected, that all these animals and stuff are brothers, friends, family, this kind of interconnectedness. But there's a number of reasons why these chants are performed. And again, like I said, it's covered a little better here than what I could give you just talking. So, I'm going to see, there's 4 factors that can produce sickness: a natural phenomenon, um, animals, and ceremonial paraphernalia, this touched or handled that's inappropriate, and also the idea of like kind of aliens, or witches or evil. Now, when they mean aliens, they're not talking about necessarily beings coming from the sky. Specifically, they're talking about anything alien to their environment, especially Europeans who come from across the sea, with slaughter in their teeth, for example. But if you'll notice, this is very much like poetry. And that's what, oral tradition, a lot of poetry and oral tradition is very similar. And so that's why you have these kind of ideas repeated over and over and over again, because it is a song, and it's something that's supposed to be memorized. Um, all of these things have a spirituality that's connected. So I want you to kind of realize that if you read through. Now, when you get to the Chippewas, theirs is a lot different. And it's interesting because, there were 3 mass migrations from the Asia area to North America over time. There was one at about 25,000 to 20,000 BC. There was one at about 17,000 BC, and one at about 10,000 to 13,000 BC. And with them came waves of people, some from kind of an Asian Mongolian descent, I found it interesting that these are very kind of like haiku like, and they're a little bit simpler. But these dream songs with the Chippewa are especially ones that are supposed to connect to supernatural beings out there. And again, these are chants. These are very incantatory. They're repeated. Oftentimes, these chants would be placed, you know, at the end of a longer chant. Um, but you don't have to read all this stuff. But I want you to kind of focus on the dream songs, and kind of what they're saying, and how the focus for tribes is not on the materialism and the evils that come with civilization, but the focus is on life and the experience of being human. And so that's what I want you to look at. Um, Now, the ghost songs of the Arapaho and the Algonquin, they're really interesting. They're really interesting, and it's interesting how they change because a lot of these ghost songs are were written in response to the invasion of Europeans, and you'll see that especially in the Messiah letter. Um, and it's what's really interesting about kind of tribal people is they don't have prophets. You know, typically religions of civilization need prophets because civilization is so messed up that in order for us to navigate it, uh, and live life without, well, we do tear each other apart. But basically, in order for humans to kind of live in civilization, we have to come up with prophets to tell us how to live because living in civilization is a very unhealthy and unnatural way to live. And it's not, and tribal people live, an existence that has less than 1% crime, less than 1% mental illness, and there's territorial disputes, much like anything else in nature over land and resource. But these tribes don't rise up and go and conquer all the other people of the world and say you have to live this way, the way that civil, the way that I say live, which is what civilization does. It's like the necromongers from the Chronicles of Riddick. Control, or convert or die. Be a Roman or die. Be a British subject or die. Um, and so it's not until they come in contact with civilization and oppressors that you get a lot of these ghost songs that are that create kind of prophecies about the dead rising up and getting revenge upon all the invaders and this kind of things of that nature. And so ghost songs kind of change as civilization comes. But again, if you'll notice, these ghost songs, especially the songs of Harappa, or have a very warlike nature and a sense of sadness to them. And you can see a nation is coming, a nation is coming, and these things. And if you'll notice in many Native American songs, it is like an animal, like an eagle or something, that brings this message. Um, okay, so just want you to kind of be aware of these kind of bigger issues. And again, James Mooney explains this far better than I ever could and more succinctly in a discussion. So, if you really want to kind of understand ghost songs, I very much, think that you should read this. James Mooney is a scholar that specializes in this. Okay, so these are traditional, and then you can see, like with Gertrude Simmons Bonnin, where the traditions, even her name is no longer Native American. Have you can see the influence of education where these kids are placed in schools and they're beaten and punished if they speak in their native language or if they carry on any of the cultural practices. And that's something that we learned, that the Americans learned from the British and from the Romans. That's how if you want to conquer somebody, you erase their history, you erase their culture, you erase their language, you separate children from the adults. And the Romans and the British have been doing it for thousands of years, and we just sadly kind of copied the same thing over here. But Gertrude Simmons Bond, you'll see, is got a more traditional narrative practice as she writes this Impressions of an Indian Childhood. And so what you're starting to see now is you're starting to see, the chants, which were a traditional American voice, a true original American voice and writing voice. And now you can see how different it is for someone and it's also with the Messiah letters with Avoca. You can see how different, the writing styles are and how similar they've become to those other oppressed people like Booker T. Washington and a lot of the slaves and Chestnut who are writing. You see a lot of similarity and themes emerging in both of these sets. These themes of impression, these things of trying to maintain dignity and trying to persevere through the suppression. And you see it in the writing and in the narrative styles start to become very much like those slaves that were educated and write, former slaves and slaves that were educated and write about their experience. So you'll start to see some of those same narrative structures. The last person that we have here is Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and author of the Yellow Wallpaper. And I considered not including her in this because I know that many of you probably had her in high school. But what I want you to understand about this Yellow Wallpaper is at the time, let's say if you were a man at this time and you were, an evil shite, and your wife wasn't behaving the way that you wanted her to behave. Maybe she was, being a little bit too independent or not doing everything that you tell her in the patriarchy. You could have her locked up in a mental institution and lobotomized and shock therapy and all this stuff. Uh, Pretty much just on your word. And it depends on, the doctor and his attitudes of whether or not, they would take your wife and or take your wife from you and put her in these places against her will. And so what happened with Charlotte Perkins Gilman is she had postpartum depression after one of her children, and she went to get treatment from a specific doctor. His name escapes me right now. Hertz, I don't know. But I can't remember his exact name. But at the time, his method for treating postpartum depression was extensive electroshock therapy to the brain, to a certain region of the brain. And that was supposed to cure it. And they also believe that you should be locked away and given an iron-rich diet, and that you shouldn't have any contact or anything that caused emotions, even positive emotions like visitors. So it was pretty much isolation, no fresh air. They believe you should be locked kind of in a closed room and given electroshock therapy. The problem with that is it was absolutely wrong. It made matters much, much worse. And Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who I guess at one time she was Charlotte Perkins Stetson, she had postpartum depression and was locked away and had these things done to her, and she almost went insane. She barely survived it. So when she came out, she wrote this Yellow Wallpaper in response as a criticism of this particular doctor's forms of treatment, and have it published in a newspaper. And in the newspaper, she wrote an article saying this form of treatment is making women go insane, and this is not healthy, and this is not right. This is just insane. And the short story had such an impact as a criticism of the medical practices that caused real change in how women were being treated by doctors at the time. She also joined the women's suffrage movement and was a huge leader in women's rights. So that just concludes some notes. I mean, most of the material that you need to know is in PDF documents, and I don't want to just repeat everything that they say and waste your time. But I did want to kind of just hit those highlights and go over a few things. So this is week 4. Don't forget that you have an essay coming up. Anyways, all right. Thank you.